with our own Brittany Kennison talking about the results of the Bang survey that recently went out. Just a reminder, we are recording the session, so if you're not able to attend the whole thing, you can jump to our website, or if you have our YouTube channel already set up, you can go straight to that and view the recording there. So with that, I will go ahead and hand it off to Brittany.
Thanks, Tim. Hey everyone, good afternoon. As I said, my name is Brittany Kennison and I'm one of the planning members for Bang. And for those who are recently new to this group, we sent out a survey earlier this year. Since 2020 was really our big kickoff year that we had been spent a lot of time planning towards and really had to readjust, as we all did, for these kinds of things. So of course, it's always good to get feedback to find out, especially with our first year, what has went well, and then what can we either keep doing better or improve on. And so I'm just going to take a few minutes at the start of this to go over that. To start with, we had 65 participants who took the survey, which is fantastic, and we got some really great feedback. And overall, you've rated this about effective as a 4.1 average rating. Go to the next slide, Tim. So one of the questions was talking about future topics, and I forgot to mention too that the survey is on the forum, or these specific forums. We're going to talk a little bit about other possible things for the Bang group. So the future topics were related to these forums, and managing requirements came out as number 1, followed by organizational change management, writing requirements, business case development, data mining and analytics, VA involvement in RFP development, and meeting facilitation. Since we've had the survey, I know we've had some requirements sessions. These are going to help us as we plan and engage more speakers. And I know that we'll have some more information, hopefully to share in the coming months, on a series focusing on organizational change management. All right, next slide. So we also had an open-ended question asking what other forum topics you'd like us to consider. And I bolded some of the areas that came up quite a few times. And, having worked previously in EIS and with the P3 group, we heard a lot about Agile, and we know that's really important for state agencies. Well, I shouldn't say just state agencies, because we have many other folks joining, talking about, Agile and how BA roles specifically fit into that. Also, a few comments around cybersecurity, graphics and data infographics, OCM, again, we just talked about that, and writing test cases. And I think, what's going to be helpful is either get a little bit more detailed, and I think it's, as we engage speakers, they kind of want us to know where to focus a specific topic, and we are using this data to work with those folks. We also asked you to rank how we did on some of the following tasks here. The forum topics, how if speakers are professional and had relevant experience, our newsletter, communication from us, and if it was professional and timely, forum meetings, were they well organized? While we, we're grateful for the ratings, there's always areas to improve, and we're going to talk a little bit about that next. All right, so some open-ended feedback. We have 2 slides on this, but didn't put everything, but we wanted to make sure that we address, some areas where we could definitely improve. But we did have some very nice comments and talking about how it's been really helpful, just for us, but for the community of VAs. And wanted to know, from Microsoft Teams, as that becomes open and available to more agencies, when we have a team to share. Certainly the downside to using a team group is that those outside of state government will not be able to access. And so we are talking about how we can have a platform. We can have, templates and other things that we can share with folks. So some more discussion to have on that. But if there are specific things for state agencies, we might even consider doing that if it's going to be focused on BA work within state agencies. The other two comments are related to the meeting links. And, again, as we all transitioned to working remotely and using this new platform, we had some bumps along the way. And we think that we've got it right. If we haven't, please let us know. The other comment is, related to the materials that we put out. And I think most of you guys know that all of us, we are all volunteers. We all, already have our full-time job, but we care very much about, improving the work of BAs within the state and connecting. So we understand that even though our volunteers, we need to make sure that everything that we send out is top-notch. So this is also a call to action that if any of those would like to join our group, and help with these things, we would absolutely love that. And we will also chat more about some other opportunities that we hope to have coming up. All right. Next slide, please. All right. So as I mentioned, we have outside of these forum groups, we have some other things that we would like to work on. Some of these are related to just within the state agencies. Except for the mentoring program, we know that, we have benefited from that professionally. And I guess more unofficial mentorship. Putting something like this together would be fantastic. We know it would take a lot of time. So again, if this is something that you were interested in assisting with, that would be great. It's not just limited to state agencies. The others regarding a state BA certification would mimic something similar to what we have for project management certification, the Oregon specific one. We are looking at putting something like that together, as well as a job classification. So there is not a specific BA classification within state agencies. We do have a project management specific position description, but those of us that are BAs might fill, well, at least I know in my career I've had been classified in multiple position descriptions, and so having something standard I think would be really beneficial. And the other thing that we've been talking about are partnerships with other states and non-state BA programs in a group, just to find more ways to get engaged and to help share materials. So again, these are some of the things that we're talking about going beyond the forums, and would love to have your help if you're interested in working on any of these things. And with that, I'll go ahead and turn it back over to Tim to introduce our speaker for today.
Awesome. Also wanted to thank those of you of the 65, anybody that's on the call now that participated in the survey. Thank you for the input that you provided to us. Again, I think we've probably thanked you before, but we can't thank you enough. It helps us kind of shape what's on the horizon and determine what we're going to spend our volunteer time on and our efforts towards with the Bang. So thank you all. And with that, I'm going to introduce Kim. Hopefully you saw our newsletter and you were able to read her bio and already kind of have an idea of what's coming up here from Kim. But just in case you're joining on the phone and didn't catch the newsletter or whatever, and in case you don't know Kim, which if you're a BA in this community, I find that kind of hard to believe. But Kim has been doing project management and BA work for over 25 years, including work in organizations like the State of Oregon, City of Eugene, eWeb, Lane County, University of Oregon, Willamette University, Symantec, Oracle, and Nike. Nice long list. She has also presented and taught many management topics, including project management and BA, nationally and internationally, including at the PMI North America Conference in 2004 and 2007. So with that, I'm going to hand it off to Kim, and you can go ahead and present your stuff and take over.
Thank you, Tim. And thank you, Brittany, and thank you everybody for inviting me to be here this afternoon. It's always great to have an opportunity to meet with you all. And while I know it's kind of always weird to just see a bunch of floating, initials, I know that a lot of you out there are either former students of mine or colleagues that we've worked together. And so really hope that today's topic resonates with you. And it was a lot of fun to put this together. So I'm really excited to be presenting on this. I'm going to go ahead and see if bring this. Yep, it's working. Technology, yay. And I mostly use Zoom, so Teams is it's kind of like, what's going to happen next? But as my presentation comes up here, all right, here it is. I'm gonna try leaving my video on, but if it starts getting a little jaggy, I might turn it off. So we'll see how it goes here. And I'd also like to encourage you, because I like good interaction. I actually was teaching this morning, and I'll be teaching again tomorrow morning, so I'm kind of in the teaching groove. So if you have questions or anything you'd like to interject or add, we've got an hour. So I've got, just a small deck of slides here, hoping that you have lots of things that you would like to either ask or share out as examples. Because this is a topic that I trust most of you have a lot of experience with as well. And I'm hoping that you have some examples that you can share out. So please, I've got my chat window up. Tim is going to help me here in case I'm not able to catch your question while I'm yakking away. So what I'll try to do is, before I transition to my next slide, if you have posted a question or a comment in chat relevant to the slide that's up, that's the point where I will then respond to that. So Tim's going to help kind of prompt me in case I don't catch that before I move on to the next one. So here we go. So this was the write-up for today's presentation. So I'm trusting this is what you all read about and what interested you to be here. So I titled it as Making Your Case. I didn't want it to be specifically about a business case, because there's all different kinds of cases that business analysts are involved in. So it could be, for a particular stakeholder, not necessarily around a particular business case. It could be something that's leading into a project. It might be a process improvement initiative, you name it. There's all different kinds of cases that business analysts get. Either you initiate on your own based on the work that you do, the things that you're monitoring or involved in, stakeholders that you are, basically assigned to be, in relationships and engaging with, and, kind of purview of what their involvement is in the areas that you are working in. Or it might be that your organization is monitoring or is particularly responsible for a community of stakeholders that you're tapped with, making a case to either perform some initiative or take some initiative on. So what my intention was is to talk about what are the kinds of things that you would do to prepare a case, and then make your case, and then your follow-up. So that's the prep, pitch, and post concept that I have here. So starting out, thinking about preparation is the key. And I'm as a triple major, and one of which my favorite is science, and the study of life sciences. Louis Pasteur is one of my favorites in the field, so I had to include him as it relates to preparation. So one of his famous quotes: "In the field of observation, chance favors only the prepared mind." So thinking about making your case, preparation is really critical, and taking the time thoughtfully up front and identifying, starting out with thinking about, if it's starting from the lens of the business or an organization, whatever that lens is, whatever you call that from where you stand, or if it's from a particular stakeholder that you're going to be working at from that platform, what are their needs in order to make the case? And if you're kind of putting it in the camps of requirement types from the needs to the solutions, right? So we want to start with understanding the needs, either from the business or the stakeholder needs. So the questions to be asking in the preparation is, okay, so what are the factors, internal, external, or indicators, key performance indicators, or customer service indicators, customer satisfaction indicators, or maybe you have some core values or things that you're using that drive the services, products, or services that your organization is primarily, targeted to be the purpose of your business or organization. What are those factors or indicators that are driving those needs? So kind of starting from objectively, what are those things? And, either they're known or maybe there's something new that's turning up that needs to be investigated further, and trying to really get into and understanding what are those factors that need to be uncovered and what are the measures that go with those, whether they're objective measures or subjective measures. So thinking about what are those things that need to be delved into further. So starting from that perspective, and then preparing for the pitch. Okay, so who are the decision makers? Who do we need to be thinking about that we're going to be making the case to? So from kind of both ends of the spectrum, like who have the needs and who do we need to be preparing the case for? Because we need to be thinking about how do we prepare it in a language, in a format, in terminology, etc., that the decision makers are going to be receptive to, that they're going to be able to take in and make sense out of, comparative to other things that they're going to have to make choices between. So we got to be thinking also about who the decision makers are. And it may not be the obvious ones. So taking the time to think about that, and maybe asking your, who you report to, or maybe the key people in the organization that might be related to the business or the stakeholder needs at hand, that are going to come into play in terms of making decisions around what to do about whatever that case is. So we want to identify who those folks are as well. Now, to get there, we also need to understand who then are the stakeholder communities, not just what are the needs, but who are the stakeholder communities that we're going to need to do some proactive planning around in terms of engaging with, eliciting requirements, and getting feedback from initially. And these are also going to be the people that we're going to, in the follow-up, in the post step, to do the follow-up and the communication back to, as well as be thinking on the long view, assuming that what your case is, that it's the decision is to, yes, whatever these needs are, we need to attend to them. Okay, we need to get prepared to go ahead and resolve or solve these needs, that those stakeholder communities are then going to be the target of that follow-on, likely to be packaged into a project. So we want to start that early identification of the stakeholders. So think about this as pre-project work. And so we want to be thinking early on of who those stakeholder communities are, and then what are the types of things that we're going to be doing to engage with them and get their feedback. Now, to get to there, to do the research as part of the elicitation, we do more than reach out to stakeholders, right? So from the business side and understanding business need, and also from the stakeholder side and understanding stakeholder needs, there's also other areas of research and other ways to do the analysis that we need to be thinking of. So are there standards such as industry research or white papers? Are there measures that we can do some comparative analysis with that we're going to need to have available or have as part of that preparation to build the case as either part of the analysis to do our gap analysis, or that we can use as sort of baseline or watermark, if you will, to compare with the current state in your existing organization or in where the stakeholder communities live. So we want to understand what we can use for measures, standards or measures that we can use as our gauges from where our current state is to where we need to get to in terms of our future state. So to then wrap that together, we need to then be thinking about what approaches or methods are we going to need to plan for or use to do the engagement for gathering the inputs and preparing for pitching our case. So this is all the prep step, if you will. So I've got some slides coming up next that are going to speak to what those things might be. Okay, so I don't see any questions, so I'm going to be moving to my next slide. All right, so here we are now going to take a look and talk through some of what methods and tools we might be using for preparing our case. And this typically requires a combination of methods and tools that we either are going to use together at once in one combination, or maybe in a series of progressive elaboration to work towards building that case. So thinking about business needs analysis, again, thinking what are those key performance indicators, maybe looking at, do we have core values or business or operational goals that have been set that we can use as another gauge, as a comparative. There might even have been done either previously or maybe at this point doing some form of a SWOT analysis where we're looking internally at strengths and weaknesses or externally at opportunities and threats that we might be planning to do, or as an engagement with stakeholders. For our stakeholder identification and analysis, we might be using some tools such as creating personas for stakeholders that we may not be able to go directly engage with. So we might want to be doing some persona development where we create some characters, if you will, that represent a particular stakeholder that we use as a character, if you will, for building our case or representing an aspect of our case. VOC is voice of customer. It's a kind of the same idea of a persona, but in voice of customer, it's a way of representing a stakeholder as though we are hearing from their perspective, from their voice. And getting voice of customer often involves doing interviewing, actually doing some research or observation, maybe even doing some focus groups, gathering up, basically gathering up a number of inputs to make a representation of that voice of customer. And I've got some other examples on slides that are coming up here as well to talk about different methods to do stakeholder identification and analysis. And I'd like to mention that I have provided a business analyst workbook that has some of the things that I'm going to be showing in the examples that are coming up, that will be available as a follow-on distribution to all of you, along with a copy of this slide deck. Other things that we might be doing, industry research, as I mentioned, white papers. There's a number of associations that do nothing but industry research, like the Standish Group, and others out there. We might even be looking to professional associations such as the IIBA or PMI, that also has done quite a bit now in terms of business analyst research, providing white papers, journal documentation and things like that that we can look to. Documentation analysis is just a fancy way of saying, hey, let's go and look at some of our artifacts out there. Maybe we've got some prior prior examples or studies or things that we can look to of previous projects, or looking at reports that have come out or surveys that have been produced that we can, just like now, we had Brittany reviewing the results of a survey and doing analysis on that to kind of further, what's next? Where do we go from here to address the needs that have resulted from the survey? Requirements, elicitation, and documentation. There's surveys again, interviews and observation, and the things that business analysts would do to elicit requirements from stakeholders or observation of how things, processes, how things work in a business, understanding what current state business rules, how things actually work operationally that might need to be improved upon, maybe even doing some of the things such as use cases or storyboarding, process mapping. Could even be things like value stream mapping, where you're looking for how things are currently functioning as a process and where there might be areas for improvements. And many different forms of diagramming that kind of fall into that same category, where you're really looking at how the current state of things are functioning and where there might be opportunities, where there's gaps that an initiative or a project or something can help address that need and improve on that. And that's what then leads into doing gap analysis and being able to provide recommendations based on the research that you would then put into your final documentation of your case, whether you call that a business case or a feasibility study or a stakeholder case. However you frame it and the situation would be that final documentation that you're going to use to make your pitch. And remembering that we want to make sure that that final case has some form of a review team or editing, an editor, somebody other than yourself, hopefully, that can have another set of eyeballs, another set of hands, another brain or two to kind of think through and give you feedback, to help you kind of smooth it out and make sure that when you make the pitch, that it's the best it can be. That may also be the team or colleagues that you might want to work with for when you're preparing for the pitch. So we'll talk about that when we get to that step as well. All right, so let's talk about some of these particular tools and techniques for the prep, because I think that's really where the bulk of the work is up front. Making the pitch itself doesn't have as much to it because it's really about the preparation. So we've got some options here on what we might do in terms of stakeholder identification. There's a number of different techniques and things that we can use as tools to do that. Some of which are, the more obvious, like a org chart, some sort of hierarchical representation of where stakeholders are and what is their hierarchical reporting structure and how we want to be able to communicate that or understand what the relationship structure is for those stakeholders. Good old suspect board. This is more tongue-in-cheek right here, and we'll get to this on another slide coming up, of a different type of version of what that might be, actually on the next slide. And over here, we'll have this coming up on the next slide too, and looking at where we might need to be thinking about interest and interest and power of what our stakeholders are, where they're at in the grid and what level of interest and essentially what their stake is and how much effort we need to be involving the stakeholder and thinking about where are they currently at and what is their desired state in terms of their awareness. Are they resistant, neutral, supportive, or leading? And so getting some sense on their current versus their desired state that will help us in terms of planning for the engagement and what level of effort by stakeholder we might need to be, planning those efforts for. This guy over here is something that I innovated in working with clients, and I kind of think about this as a community map where it's taking this kind of stacked concentric circles with from the center out, thinking about from where you're at and the different layers of communities of stakeholders to identify where are within each layer, what are the communities of stakeholders that are within each of these layers. And then we can use these levels or these layers to help us think about kind of proximity, if you will, or span of influence relative to the closeness to the center. And again, thinking about what does that mean in terms of the case and the impact and the level of interest, the level of relevance of that stakeholder and the efforts that you or your organization needs to be considering for the needs of that stakeholder. All right, this is the one I was mentioning that's kind of like a suspect board, but it's different. This is called a Stakeholder Influence Map. And this actually is a version from toolshero.com. This might be a resource you want to check out. So influence mapping is a way of representing stakeholders using the combination of nodes and lines, and the size of the node represents the relative weight or influence of the individual stakeholder. And then the arrows, of course, represent the relationships between the stakeholders. And the color also helps us represent different aspects of what that stakeholder means as well. And so an influence map we can use, and the shade of the arrows can mean different things. And so this gives us some insight as to, are these formal relationships? Are these informal relationships? How do we manage the relationships of stakeholders and influence between these stakeholders as we're starting to plan for an engagement, or we're addressing a particular need of a stakeholder and understanding the various influences of other stakeholders surrounding them. Curious, have any of you used an influence map like this before, or seen an influence map like this before? You could use chat or unmute if you like to speak to this. Thanks, Leanne. Nice to see your name up there too. Hey, Jennifer. Okay, yeah. So yeah, this is it's kind of an obscure one. Okay, all right, Carolina, you've seen and used one of these before. Very cool. Okay. Yeah, so if this is something new and different, I encourage you to go check this out. Check out this site. I believe they have a template you can download. Yeah, so this is something, a new tool for the toolbox if you haven't seen this one before. But yep, this is called an influence map. Yep, check that one out. Okay. Thanks everybody for joining in the chat on that. In that business analyst workbook or BA workbook that will be distributed, there's a couple of sheets in there. One of them is a stakeholder register that includes, where you would include your stakeholders, but it also includes the action planning for engagement that comes from doing the engagement assessment matrix. And that is the current and desired engagement level of these rankings right here. And I believe that sheet also has this guy in there of the power interest grid that you can then rank order your stakeholders from low to high on the power side and the interest low to high to help you determine those who minimum effort. You just need to keep, kind of keep monitoring them or keep informed. Whereas there are those that you need to keep satisfied or manage closely. And these are really useful for your elicitation planning and ongoing communications planning for stakeholder engagement to help you put together your communications plan, which there's also a sheet in that workbook for your communications planning. So a stakeholder register and a communications plan can be very well informed by doing a couple of these stakeholder engagement assessments. So again, using a combination of tools to help you identify first your stakeholders and then doing some assessment will help you sort of rank order or prioritize the efforts that you need to plan forward. And then also think about who's in the best position to be a relationship owner. It's not always you, the business analyst. In some cases, yeah, but maybe not in all cases. So there might be a time where you might want to go and find somebody who's in a better position to manage or be a relationship owner for an individual stakeholder. So I'm curious, I know, again, a number of you may have taken my Intro to BA class where you might have received the BA workbook with this type of stuff in it, but I'm curious if others have used a model like this in your practice. And again, if you could use chat or you can open mic and speak out if you'd like. Just curious how popularized these types of methods are in the practice that you guys are familiar with. I'll just wait a moment to give you all a chance to respond. All right, well, thanks, Brittany. Oh, thank you, Mike. Thanks, Jennifer, Tim. Yeah, power interest matrix has been around for a while. All right, thank you, Ralph, for your response there. Yep. So on large projects, yeah, and I would say that's probably the case, right? So small, medium projects, this might be a bit much to try to like put this additional overhead. But for larger projects where we have lots and lots of stakeholders, a lot more to manage, these models can really help kind of sort and sift and prioritize our stakeholders, and especially where there's a lot at risk, where we have a lot of stakeholders involved. Thanks, Frank. Yeah, for those complex projects where if we don't have a good handle on our stakeholder management or stakeholder engagement, especially where we might have some unawares or resistant stakeholders that could cause, probably unintentional troubles. We probably need to have a bit more tools in our toolbox to help us prevent any unintentional consequences from just not having that additional help in managing our stakeholders for those larger, more complex projects. Yeah, good. Thanks, everybody. And yes, this goes with a good communication plan, and this will help feed into your communications planning, as well as any particular direct engagement with stakeholders that might come out of the assessment for desired engagement, particularly for any of those stakeholders that rank out of the keep satisfied or manage closely. But for those that turn up in the monitor or keep informed, hey, we got some quick entries in our communications planning to make sure we include those folks in our status reporting, etc. So this is a helpful, kind of cross-check, if you will, in your planning and making sure that you haven't forgotten anybody and that you have given consideration for any additional engagement that might need to have some planned actions and additional support in managing stakeholders based on understanding where we need them to be. And again, this isn't always in the context of a project. This could be in the context of just ongoing relationship management operationally with stakeholders, so that we can kind of keep a beat on things, keep a good idea of what's happening out there in the environment and the organizations where our stakeholders live, that may then lead into understanding that a new need has presented itself. So that BA workbook, the intent of that is not so much for a particular project, but more for ongoing stakeholder management for the communities that you as a BA are responsible for, to help you kind of monitor your gauges, if you will, and in this case for stakeholder monitoring. Thanks again for your inputs with this slide in your chat. Appreciate it. Elicitation tools and techniques. So now that you've identified stakeholders, now we need to do some elicitation with them. So some of the things that we might be doing are looking at root cause analysis and understanding, well, if there's some stuff going on that we need to make a case for, well, what are some of the root causes or some of the cause and effect things that might be contributing to the problem at hand, or what opportunity we might want to be providing some solutions for. So we've got our good old Ishikawa fish diagram, right? So here's an example of that, an example of a fishbone diagram. We might want to be doing some use case diagramming where we have, from a particular stakeholder's perspective, a particular need they may have that we're going to map out what are the needs that we might need to come up with a solution for. So here we have a use case that we've actually got a visual representation that we could be making a pitch for a solution that meets a specific stakeholder need. Over here, we have a rough draft, first cut on a process map of a current state process, looking at by stakeholder, by role, the step-by-step of that current state, where we can take that to do some further analysis on to see for that current state of the process. Oh, and it ends in a smiley face. So that's a nice way for the process to end, where we can use this as a tool for evaluating if this process is a target for improvement. And we might combine this with some sort of weighted score, or we might have some scoring criteria to compare with other processes that we've mapped to look at. All right, let's go ahead and map out a bunch of processes for this targeted area. And for those processes that have, so many nodes greater than, so many handoffs greater than, so many decisions more, greater than, we could set some criteria, some decision criteria to score and target for our case to make, to make a case for some process improvement initiative and target some particular processes that may need some smoothing out. This where we might even take this to doing some value stream mapping, where we're going to look for where we can lean out a particular process that may be taking too long, or might just be, just needs to have some smoothing out for whatever reason. So process mapping is a really great tool that we can use for eliciting requirement and looking for areas of improvement. And the good old SWOT, that's been around for a long, long time. And again, we're using that as a way to explore internal and external strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And we can use SWOT for a lot of different things. And the main thing is deciding what does internal and external mean and declaring that, so that if you're using this for maybe a brainstorm session with stakeholders that you've identified, that it's clear to everybody in the brainstorming session what is meant by internal and external. And again, also having clarity on what is meant by strengths and weaknesses and opportunities and threats. So these are just a handful of tools of many. So I'm curious, in terms of elicitation tools and techniques, what other tools and techniques you commonly use in your practice for eliciting requirements from your stakeholder communities. So again, if you would share out in the chat, what are some of the common elicitation tools and techniques that are in your toolbox, your go-to hammer and screwdriver and measuring tape, if you will, for doing this type of work? Give you a minute to think about that and share out in the chat. It's always interesting to see if you've been using some things that are different than what I've shared here. I know it's getting on to be 4 o'clock and it's get the old brain going here. Oh yeah, interviews, job shadows. Thanks, Tim. Yeah, give me a good old whiteboard with sticky notes. Yeah, good old brainstorm. That ends in a beautiful spreadsheet. Yes. Yes. Love that. Yep. Brittany. To mention, oh yeah, the swim lane diagrams, love those. On the Jennifer, back to your chat comment, I've been using this tool. It used to be called Real-Time Board. It's now called Miro, and it's what I've been using we've been using at Willamette University for our classroom, our virtual classroom. And it, of course, has a phone app. And the phone app has a way that you can take a picture of your sticky notes, and it will digitally translate those stickies into digital sticky notes. And then those digital stickies can be downloaded into a CSV file, so you don't have to type the stickies up by hand anymore. Can you believe it? Oh my gosh. And now, depending on the handwriting and the quality of the pen, so there's a little bit of tactical stuff to know about to get the stickies to translate digitally. But even if 50% of those stickies can be handled by digitally being translated, that would be huge. So so I would just highly recommend, if you can, if you're doing a lot of virtual brainstorming and having to figure out a way to do the stickies digitally, that might be a tool that you might take advantage of. I'm just going to type it up here in our chat. It's called Miro. And yeah, we've been using the heck out of it. It's been a total lifesaver with the working through virtual training and virtual facilitation through this pandemic. Yeah, all right. Thanks, you guys. Yeah, if any of you have been taking my classes since then, you've gotten familiar with Miro. I found out Nike's actually starting to use it. My daughter's been doing project work there, and she's like, "Oh yeah, I'm setting up the Miro board to do a. We're gonna do a voting on our next scrum or our next sprint." I'm like, "What? You're actually using that over there now?" She goes, "Oh yeah, Mom, we're using that now." I'm like, "Wow, you guys are amazing." All right, next. Thank you again for sharing out in the chat. So those are just a handful of some tools in terms of preparing for your pitch. So eventually you've done all of that gathering up, you've packaged your pitch, you've, done some research, you've put it together, and you're ready to make your pitch. So now it's time to pitch to the deciders. So of course, practice, 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 doing a run through ahead of time, making sure you've worked out your rough spots. So back to the business case document and having a review team or an editor. These are the same folks that you're going to want to have on your side for that practice rehearsal. If maybe you have a sponsor or somebody who initiated your endeavor of doing the research, of doing the prep, to run it through them and getting their buy-in and having their input, but making sure that you do have a little bit of a practice ahead of time. And thinking again back to who are the decision makers that you're going to be packaging your pitch for. So translating your pitch into what you're going to be presenting to your stakeholders. So what is the right language, wording, or visuals, or terms that are going to help them connect and translate our business stakeholder needs into solutions that they can clearly make the connection between and get behind and support. And it's not always a straightforward, clear connection. It might take a bit of work. So back to the practice rehearsal. So we don't want to assume that what we've put together is going to make that clear connection. So that's where we want to do some practice, running it by maybe one of the decision makers that you've got a good relationship with, that you can, give them sort of does this make sense? Or do you have any recommendations on how I might, reword this or put it into terms that make more sense for who all is going to be involved in the decision making. So that translation can take a while. And that wordsmithing is where we can spend a lot of time and effort, because the pitch, you may only have the one shot. So making sure that you've done a good job in that translation is where you're going to be spending the time in pulling that business case together and making it relevant and meeting that audience, in this case, the decision makers, meeting them where they're at. So thinking about from where their perspective and the terms that are going to be best fitting for them to make the connection. The prep ahead of time for the decision makers. If you have a business case or whatever the case is, whatever you call it, sending that out ahead of time, whatever that means in terms of distribution, or placing it in an area such as maybe you have an intranet or a SharePoint or some location that you're going to be making the materials available from. Whatever it is, maybe it is a physical package that needs to be distributed ahead of time. But that's the idea, is you give people time ahead to review and be prepared for whatever you are going to be asking them as a call to action that you're going to be proposing. And logistics, even though now, we're kind of in this weird in-between time where, some folks might be physically back at the office, others are still working virtual. And so thinking about what is the environment that we're going to have to be making the pitch in. are there options that you have to work with that will make it the most optimal environment for the decision at hand? Now, if it's, if it's the type of a decision where it optimally, you could actually get the decision makers physically at the location that is where the stakeholders are experiencing the need, that they can physically see and feel and experience what those needs are. That would be great. If you can get the decision makers physically in a room together, that would be incredible. But we know right now that's, may not be the case. So you might have to get a little creative right now. If the timeliness requires you to, that you don't have as many options as you'd like to have. But the logistics, the environment, the creating of the environment, that might even mean the virtual environment. And how do you create that virtually? So thinking about virtual platforms such as Miro, like I just mentioned, how can you create that environment in such a way that will help optimize or make that help support your case that you're pitching, that's helping support you in that way. And then just like any other type of a session, is good meeting management, good facilitation skills, following Plan, Do, Check, Act. I have that coming up here on another slide, is making sure that you've set the outcome of what's expected from the beginning and what needs to be decided, and that you facilitate that discussion to get there. So that starts with the prep ahead of time, and that you've also done some good practice, and that you've got strong facilitation skills, so that you might have some decision makers who from experience, or maybe you've had some good insight from others who can help you be prepared to know, what to expect from those decision makers and how they might behave in that atmosphere, in that environment, that you might need to be prepared for, and managing them to help get through the facilitated session, to get to the decision that you need to drive to that. So making the pitch and making the case, while there's these things that we do during there, it largely is dependent on all that prep work, getting you ready for it. So this is about, if you think about the effort overall, I would say a good, at least 50%, if not more, is the prep, and 25% is the pitch, and 25% is the follow-up. If I were to just kind of rough gauge, kind of give you an idea of effort, it's still a goodly amount of effort, but again, most of it is on the prep. So we don't want to shortchange the prep, but there is still a goodly amount of work we want to do in getting our pitch ready and made to our decision makers. Anything else from your experience that you would recommend to your colleagues that you would be doing for your making the pitch, either in preparing for, the pitch itself or during the pitch? And I'll give you guys a moment to think about it and then respond in your chat. Okay, nothing. Oh, there we go. Thanks, Brittany. Yeah, this part's the yep. Not much more to say there. All right. Thank you, Brittany. And the second there, whoever put their thumbs up, appreciate that. All right, so here's a few things, methods and tools. And I love this baseball with I actually, one little factoid about myself as I was a little urchin growing up, I had two big brothers. I didn't even know about softball. I grew up playing baseball. And after little farm league, when I hit minor leagues, our pitching coach was a former Astros. Dad of one of the kids was a former Astros player, and he was our pitching coach. So I was very fortunate to learn how to pitch from an actual professional baseball player. So I found this little guy. It was on Amazon. I thought, well, that's really cool. It actually shows you where to put your fingers on the ball for the different types of pitches. So any of you moms and dads out there with kids that are learning baseball right now, or even softball, there's these really cool teaching aids out there that are, I wish they had that when I was growing up. So a little pitch for pitching. All right, so similar to the prep, preparing for your pitch also typically involves a combination in this regard to the results from your prep. So obviously your business case documentation and materials, yes, duh, that's kind of a no-brainer. But of that, any of the results that you may have produced from your stakeholder analysis that are relevant, any of the documentation from your requirements elicitation, any of the visuals that might be supportive. Again, thinking about what will help support your pitch that is meaningful to the decision makers. What will ring true to them? What will help the decision makers connect the dots and support them in understanding the needs to the solution that you're proposing, that follows along your gap analysis and recommendations. So it's really about what makes sense to bring forward from your preparation that's in support of the pitch and making your case. So that's it. It's an all it depends based on, what's the case about and what's really important to help support that. And that's where your team, either your review team, your editor, or the person or people who are sponsoring your doing the prep and making the pitch, I would use them as sort of my guiding party, if you will, to help me pull out or tease out what would be those elements that will be helpful in pitching to the other decision makers that will help connect the dots for them and understanding and making that call to action to get the decision that is needed to be made. And then that call to action and next steps. Here's our plan, do, check, act model that we use for a lot of different things, particularly around meetings where we are looking for a decision to be made and some call to action that needs to be followed up on. So our plan, do, check, act. All right. And then there's the follow-up, the post. Follow-up, I forget it. What's the point? So we need to have a follow-up strategy. What is that going to be? And now we need to take action, right? So the plan, do, check, act. It's now the act. And well, if we do the check, all right, do we get some action items, or what are we going to do? So we need to have some way to do the follow-up, to do the check and to take action. So either you, business analyst, typically you, or if you're fortunate that maybe there's somebody at the pitch that can help with taking meeting notes, scribing, to be able to capture that with the outcome of the decision that you can then distribute to who was participating in that session. Hey, and what about those folks that we identified that need to be informed as our stakeholders? So back to our communications plan and our stakeholders we identified. So now we have to do some follow-ups to circle back around and let them know what was the outcome from all of that. And then what were the action items? So are we going to be doing some follow-on action item log? That's where our BA workbook could come in handy. I've got lots of logs in there that you can use for follow-ups. And that is the act part of the PDCA, is that, yeah, somebody's actually going to hold people accountable and do the follow-up and make sure that there is somebody assigned and that there is somebody actually going to make sure that those actions are followed through on. For the session itself, and for those who helped with building the case, is to do some direct follow-ups and some thank yous for individual contributors that helped you in putting that together and supported you along the way. Chances are they're going to be along the way further, because now you're going to be transitioning from research to planning the implementation of the solution, also known as a project. So we want to set a good tone with those folks, because chances are we're not through with them yet. We're gonna want to help. We're gonna want to build that relationship, and because we're probably going to be leaning in on that a bit more as we're now going to start working into planning for implementing the solution that we were pitching for. So relationship and, building those relationships and maintaining and continuing those forward, a big part of it is the follow-on from the things that we do as initial engagement and elicitation, as we're starting to understand and build the case for solving business and stakeholder needs. Okay, and those look like, now we're getting into a project. So now a project turns into, oh wait, Brittany, let's see what we got here. Yeah, the only downside, if it is a BA, if they have that title, are not permitted to engage the business to assist in the, are you talking about in the development of the project, Brittany?
Correct.
Yeah. Yeah, it depends on the organization and where the role delineation, does the BA hand off to a project manager? Does the BA then kind of carry that forward and partner with the project manager and then continue on through the project? It depends kind of, on that organization and the expectation of that role of the BA versus the PM. And how that carries forward and what that means in terms of the relationship with the stakeholders as it transitions into a project. Absolutely. So as we transition into a project and we get into the project model and we start thinking about things as a framework of a project, we've got now into a problem-solving model of, we've identified the problem and we are in our current state, that you are here on the map where we are now. And we're here because we came from somewhere, from some past state. And we've identified the problem by doing a bunch of things that we just talked about. We've already made the case. We've already identified the problem. In fact, now we're into planning for a future state and looking to actually select a solution, or maybe we've even, through the recommendation, identified a solution that now we're going to start planning the implementation for. This might be where we're starting the project at that point. So again, it depends on what that pitch was for and where you're at in that process. But thinking about where you're at, and if it's a project, if you're going to be starting here, here, or here, eventually, if it's implementing a solution, BAs are also very involved in planning for that transition from current to the future state, along with helping navigate and manage our stakeholders involved in preparing for what that implementation means. Is there going to be some user acceptance testing and creating test cases, preparing for organizational change if there isn't a designated organizational change agent or leader. A BA often will be the one tagged with that role to help prepare that transition to that new, what will become the new current state, which is at the moment a current state. We're going to be planning for what will then become the new current state where we need to get to. So there's a number of tools and techniques that a BA might be doing along those steps to help in the sense of a project, working with the project manager in preparing stakeholders, preparing the organization, the operations to transition into the new state of what would have been a future state, which will become the new current state. And through that, hopefully gathering and documenting and preparing artifacts so that as you make the switch from current to future, you make that shift so that when you land on the new, what becomes the new current state, that you've left behind some good artifacts of the once you came, so that the next time around, you've got a good set of as-built of things that you used that were from your pitch, the research, the surveys, all of those things that you put together in your case that led into the project that turned into the current to the transition to the future state. And that's the idea of doing all that great work and all the documentation and gathering those things up so that we can capture those and store them as artifacts so that we have those for down the road the next time we make our way around this wheel. So this requires lots of proactive planning, logistics scheduling, if nothing else, even if it's virtual, of people's time, moving parts of, things that have to be planned for, reserved, expectation management, as we saw on some of those stakeholder tools of trying to understand where they're currently at and this desired engagement level. And it takes a lot of courage because it's hard work. And oftentimes the work that we do as BAs is hidden. And oftentimes the stakeholders that we are representing or that we are advocating for may not even know the work that we're doing or appreciate that. So it can be quite a slog and unappreciated on a lot of levels, but it's the work that we do to do our best to provide value, to deliver benefit for our stakeholders and our businesses that we serve and represent, and doing good work as business analysts and using the many tools that we have at our disposal of picking tools that are appropriate for the work at hand. So I'm curious, there's a lot of stuff up here, a lot of different tools that I've talked about in just this short little bit of time. I want to take the rest of this little bit of time that we have to just kind of open up the chat or the mic for any other suggestion or tools or things that you have had really good success with in your practice as a BA in terms of putting together a case or making that transition from case to implementing into a project.
Hey, Kim, this is Brittany. So maybe while folks are thinking about those different things, I'm not sure if anything is coming to mind, and some of these things have been really successful, but it's using that in addition to knowing the audience and who you're presenting to and knowing what works. I've had some that respond much better to data, right? and some do much better with visuals and much higher level, especially executives. So
yeah, right. Knowing your audience, some folks are more visual and do better with conceptual design or conceptual visual concepts, whereas others are more data driven or metric driven or dollar sign driven, right? Yeah, so that's where in the preparation and doing some of that research on your decision makers and that audience of decision makers is trying to get an understanding of what will be the thing that will connect with them, and maybe even having a combination of those types of things in your pitch so that you have a better chance of hitting on those different buttons, if you will, to connect with your decision makers. If you have a mix of those types, for sure. Yeah. Yeah, very good. Any other ideas or suggestions? This is my last slide before my thank you slide. Actually, it's a, do you have any other questions on what techniques? It says kind of actually my last slide.
And if you'd rather ask verbally than type it in the chat and you're not able to unmute yourself, raise your hand and one of us will unmute you or give you that permission to unmute yourself so that you can ask your question out loud.
Okay, Leanne. Yeah. Yeah, sometimes we don't actually get to make a pitch in a forum where we only get to actually just go, and here it is. Let me know if you have any questions, right? That's kind of tricky. In those cases, what I like to do is a direct one-on-one, if I can, to either as the follow-up or for individual decision makers, what I would like to do is schedule a review of that document with them ahead of when the decision needs to be made, so that I have an opportunity to, first of all, make sure that they've reviewed it to the proper depth, that they make a decision that's informed, or and that it gives them an opportunity to provide feedback and ask questions so that, again, they make a good informed decision. Now that takes more time, so that instead of a one session with a group of decision makers that I'm doing the pitch to, now I'm having to make multiple pitches, if you will, or multiple sessions with decision makers. But hopefully there's not that many decision makers involved that that's too much of a lift. But that would be what I would aim to do in that case if I only get the opportunity to electronically distribute it. But that would be sort of either my follow-up or my pre-pitch if I have to just electronically distribute that. Oh, great. Yes. Always trying to make it their idea. Always make it. Yes. If you can make it their idea, that's usually the best way to get them to agree to it, right? Yeah. Oh, good. Thanks, Leanne. Yeah. And Frank, let's see, makes sense to, yeah, if you can get a few people in the room that are sort of, yeah, already kind of your sponsors, if you will. Oh, I love the bumper sticker format idea, Jesse. Yep. Yep. If it's a short and sweet bumper sticker, then it's probably simple enough to get people to support that. Oh, Brittany, absolutely. Yeah. That's usually one of the options I will give. And in fact, when it comes to the decision to be made, You know, I usually have 3 choices, and one of the choices is the do nothing, right? So do nothing, do this, or some other option. And that's usually a good one, is the impact of not doing this is usually a pretty weighty one, so that it gives people an impetus to make a choice, an impetus to choose to move off the dime, off of the current state. Yeah. Yeah, the choice of no action is still a consequence. Excellent. And hi, Jesse. Good to see you here. Yeah. All right. Yeah. Good. Good. You guys have been great. I know we're getting close to our wrap-up time, and I'm not sure, Tim, if you have some final words that you like to close out with, so I don't want to take us to the last minute. I think the only thing I have left here is just a couple of wrap-up slides on the back end of this. So again, you guys have this in PDF format to send out, as well as the BA workbook as a free share out as a companion with this. It's been great having this time with you this afternoon, and I hope this was good information. And again, it's always great to see some quote unquote see some of my former students. And just to make a quick pitch, I'm sorry I don't have any more specifics other than to let you know that I am working on kind of pulling apart and repackaging and expanding. Hey, Jennifer, nice to see you. Pulling apart and expanding both the BA and the PM intro curriculums. I see on the horizon BA certification, like the PM certification. I know, like, the work that I'm doing, I'm aligning with the IIBA and the PMI certification exam content. My intent right now isn't to be the certification program for the state, but certainly will lend itself to lead into that at some point. But be looking for that. I'm hoping to have some new classes, or at least a new schedule of the repurposed classes that I have in the fall. So that will be posted coming up through iLearn or Workday, whichever is the platform that you're currently using at that time. I think it'll be Workday at that point. So kind of keep an eye out for that. And I love promoting your BANG group. I love the acronym, and I was actually promoting it at my class this morning. And I have to make a pitch. Tomorrow is our PMI Lunch and Learn at noon. And we have a really great speaker for that. So if any of you just can't get enough of this stuff, you're welcome to go to our PMIWV.org site. And registration is still open. We have a great speaker tomorrow, Randall England, who's a pretty big league hitter that I'm so happy to have recruited for our session tomorrow. Go check it out, and maybe I'll see you there. Let me put that up, just put our website up here real quick. You still have time to register for that. If you're a PMI member, it's free. If not, it's $10, pretty inexpensive for a really great session. And we're going to have some giveaways for his books at that. And always great to see you guys. So that's it from me. And I'll hand it back to Tim if you want to. I'll stop my share here.
No need, Kim. I can just steal it from you.
Oh, there you go. You got it.
One of the wonderful things about Teams, you can just steal the share whenever you want.
You got it.
And all I have for the group is just to pitch our next forum. So we will be here again in August, same time, same channel, and we will have Shannon Stamps as our speaker for that, talking about use cases and business process mapping and modeling.
Hey.
So hope to see you all then. Of course, looking for our July newsletter that will be coming out in July, as we do the opposite months for the newsletter and the forum, and link to our website there and our BANG email address if you have any questions or comments you want to send our way. And again, thank you, Kim, and thank you all the attendees.
Have a great afternoon. Thank you.